Judaism is one of the three prominent Abrahamic religions and is easily one of the most widely known and practiced religions in the Eastern and Western worlds. There are tens of millions of religious Jews across the world. However, most Jewish practicers are in modern-day Israel, Europe, Canada, and the United States. Judaism is easily one of the world's oldest religions, stemming around 4,000 years ago in the Middle East. Source from Uri. Quote, Abraham, a Hebrew man, is considered the father of the Jewish faith because he promoted the central idea of Jewish faith, that there's only one God. At the time, many people in the Middle East worshipped many gods. It is said that Abraham and his wife Sarah were old and childless, were told by God that their children would be as plentiful as the stars in the sky, and that they would live in a land of their own, the Promised Land. This gradually came true. End quote. Source from Uri. Eventually, Abraham's grandson named Jacob, who was also called Israel, and would later become to be called the Israelites. Source from Uri. The Israelites were promised by God to be protected if they bent the knee to him. Eventually, the Hebrews, a group known for praising God that Abraham taught of, would become enslaved in Egypt. A Hebrew man named Moses would lead the Hebrews out of Egypt and onward towards the Holy Land, which is named Canaan. Source from Uri. Here, the Hebrews would fight to establish the Israelite kingdom. This would become the Jewish justification homeland in modern-day Israel, which is still to this day considered the homeland. Quote, when the Hebrews settled in Canaan, they faced spiritual, military, and political challenges. Not surprisingly, at times they worshipped the agricultural gods of their neighbors, despite warnings from the prophets that they were not to do this. In this, they followed the common historical pattern of newcomers by adapting the culture of an older, well-established people. End quote. Source from Wisner Hanks. In the Bible, we hear of the Philistines, who were warned by God to be the biggest threat to the Hebrews. The Philistines possessed greater military capability. A military expert named Saul would come to take leadership in the Hebrew kingdom and would develop it into some sort of monarchy. Source from Wisner Hanks. Quote, Saul's work was carried on by David of Bethlehem, who captured the city of Jerusalem, which he made the religious and political center of the realm. In the 10th century BCE, David's son Solomon launched a building program that biblical narrative describes as including cities, palaces, fortresses, and roads. The most symbolic of these projects was the Temple of Jerusalem, which was intended to be the religious heart of the kingdom and a symbol of Hebrew unity of God's approval of the Hebrew state. End quote. Source from Wisner Hanks. From this kingdom formation, it didn't last long and would collapse into two primary halves made up of the north and south. The north kingdom would become Israel, and the southern kingdom would become Judea. Unfortunately, Israel and Judea would break out into war over Jerusalem. Once this occurred, neighboring kingdoms and states would then siege and annex both kingdoms of Israel and Judea. This would mark the final time that the Hebrew and Jewish people would have their own state until 1949, with the formation of Israel occurring over 2,500 years later. As the fall of Judea and Israel occurred, many states would force out the Hebrews through both political and military action. This would lead to many Hebrew people becoming severely displaced. As land between multiple hands of ownership fell, the Hebrew people would embrace diaspora and would begin fleeing to new lands. Political and military developments led Jews to scatter widely into a diaspora, first throughout the Mediterranean and then beyond. Jews maintained their cohesion as a group through intermarriage, shared rituals, and devotion to a sacred text. The only rarely actively sought converts, Judaism thus became widespread, geographically, but never large in terms of numbers of adherents when compared with other world religions. End quote. Source from Wisner Hanks. The Jewish people would flee both north and west and even towards Europe. As Jewish people moved away from Canaan, they traveled to modern-day Greece and modern Italy. At the time, these two parts of Europe were the most economically prosperous and powerful nations. However, as Rome started expanding, they eventually conquered the Middle East, which would be modern-day Israel. Quote, to begin with, Jews moved west to Egypt, North Africa, and the southern Mediterranean, especially to Italy. Gradually, they moved further afield until, within birth of a few more generations, Jews could be found in almost every area of the Roman Empire. The collapse of the empire precipitated a period of turmoil in Europe, popularly known as the Dark Ages. What we know about Jews in this early medieval period is quite limited. End quote. Source from Jewish. For a quick recap, we can see how the Jewish population have consistently been either at war with other groups, or forced out of their homelands, and forced to be quite literally nomadic until the founding of the Kingdom of Israel, which would then quickly fall. After the fall of the kingdoms of Judea and Israel, the Jewish people became travelers and nomads. For nearly all their history, the Jewish people have consistently been persecuted against, discriminated against, and even had violent events occur and still occur against them. In two of the Jewish people's primary residential regions in history, the Middle East and Europe, Jewish people have continuously faced anti-Semitism. In the Middle East, they would experience anti-Semitism from the Muslim majority, and while in Europe, they would face this from the Caucasian majority. Unfortunately, widespread anti-Semitism would lead to many small-scale displacements and even turn deadly as groups would become quite violent against the Hebrew people. Fast forwarding to multiple centuries later, there would be a massive outbreak of anti-Semitism, and most specifically during the 20th century. What occurred is a very well-known event that nearly everyone in the Western world has learned about at one point in their lives. The Holocaust was a genocide of Jewish people in Europe during the Second World War. There was an estimated 6 to 12 million total people, and 6 to 8 million Jewish people who were killed in an orchestrated system of elimination through the National Socialist regime that lasted from 1933 to 1945. However, Germany was not the only nation to fall to a large swab of anti-Semitism and even become violent towards Jewish people. This was very widespread in most regions of Europe. While discrimination was very common in Western nations like France and the United Kingdom and the United States, the Nazi regime took it a step forward. At first, the regime spouted for expulsion of successful Jewish individuals. There were people who owned shops and businesses, who were involved in commerce and even leadership roles throughout their community. However, as Operation Barbarossa occurred in June of 1941, the Nazi regime started to configure their logistics from expulsion of Jewish people to extermination. Ironically, Ukrainian Jews paraded the arrival of the Germans as they viewed them as liberators from the Soviet government. However, they soon discovered the horrific reality of what the arrival of German boots on their grounds would mean. Once the Allied powers of the United States of America and the United Kingdom, as well as the military powers of France, Canada, Australia, and the British Raj, uncovered the extermination, coupled with the German power collapsing on two fronts, the reality of the Holocaust was finally revealed to the world. The fallout was very immense and extreme, which forced the Allied powers to finally see the need of a formation of a Jewish state. The formation of the Jewish state would be in, at the time, British-controlled land in Judea. Officially in 1949, after 4 years of the twilight of the Second World War, Israel was created. This special nation, the Holy Land, would finally see the light for the first time in over 2,500 years. While Israel has a unique and complex history of its formation as a nation, there is still turmoil both with political and military actions that are ever present in the modern world, as the United States of America continues to be an ally of Israel, as many Jewish people live in the United States and have created a life here post-World War II, and the atrocities that were the Holocaust. Many people view supporting or not supporting Israel as an American ally, and providing support to be a partisan policy issue. Israel might unfortunately always be used for its political military prowess and continue having unrest. Despite the complex military history Israel and the United States of America have, and the politics that center around this, many Jewish people of the United States of America have positive sentiment about Israel and still believe it is a part of what being Jewish means to them. According to Pew Research Group, in 2020 nearly half, 48%, of Jewish adults under the age of 30 describe themselves as very or somewhat emotionally attached to Israel, and 2/3 of Jews ages 65 and older feel this way. Source from Mitchell, 2021. The Pew Research Group estimates 2.4% of American adults are Jewish, including 1.7% who identify with the Jewish religion, and 0.6% who are Jews of no religion. These are those that are ethnically Jewish but consider themselves agnostic or even atheistic. The Pew Research Group survey revealed the adult Jewish population has roughly kept pace with change in the United States population, and to put these percentages in numbers equates to 5.8 million adults and 1.8 million children, or 7.5 million people of the 330 million and growing population United States of America. Source from Mitchell, 2021. Per the American Jewish Population Project, most Jewish Americans live in concentrated metropolitan areas and states, which include New York, California, Florida, specifically Southern Florida, i.e., Miami, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. Popular metropolitan areas where Jewish Americans live include Los Angeles, Boston, Northern New Jersey, Chicago, Philadelphia, and the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Source from Saxon. In conclusion, the history of the Jewish people and the continuing changes they express throughout history and modern times are surely incredible. From the rampant change of earlier Jewish history to the consistent prejudice and even the horrific realities of genocide, the Jewish people and believers of Judaism are perhaps the most adaptable people in history, as they are always moving and always progressing along with the changes of the world for the last couple thousands of years. Hello, I am Luke Gobranson. I am here interviewing one of my greatest friends. His name is Max. And we're here doing an interview for this beautiful religious class, REL 100. So, Max, would you be willing to state your full name, your place of birth, and your religious affiliation?
Yeah. Yeah. No, my name is Max Mezzi. I was born in Baltimore, Maryland, and I am Jewish.
Jewish. So that's what this entire project is about. Of course, Jewish or Jewish people, Judaism, and of course, who else would I interview other than a Jewish man? And of course, one of my greatest friends. So as a Jewish man, what does the average day look like for you? Like, what do you do? Like, what is something that every day looks like with you? You know, career, religious affiliation, activities, etc.
Yeah. No, I mean, I am like a normal, professional American. I work 5 days a week, a 9 to 5 job. I am a financial analyst with Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is a health insurance company here in Baltimore, Maryland. Really nothing significantly different from an average American, except, on Fridays, of course, we have the Sabbath, or as we refer to it, Shabbat or Shabbos, which is the Yiddish version. I have the Sabbath dinner with my father and some of my brothers every Friday, to welcome in the Sabbath.
Now,
Um,
to someone who doesn't exactly know what that is, could you explain that more, I guess, simply?
mhm. Sure. So the Sabbath is think of it from the Christian perspective, how important Sundays are to them. I guess you could say the Sabbath is our version of a Sunday for like Christians or Catholics. It goes from Friday evening to Saturday evening. um, it's supposed to sort of harken back to God's creation of the world. It's the day of rest, so on the
Mm-hmm.
final day God rested, right? That is what the Sabbath is. It's our day of rest. You go, you have your typically, there's Sabbath service in synagogue, or like what I grew up doing normally because we were living too far from a synagogue. We do the prayer at home. Just read from what's known as a siddur, which is essentially the Torah condensed into a book. Um, we'd do the prayers at home.
That's awesome. So, I mean, I think that's a great literal correlation. Is it is your variance of the Christian Sunday. That's actually something I didn't even really think of. Of course, I've heard you talk about it. You know, we're often playing video games and stuff online, and you're saying I'm going to go to have my dinner, but I never really thought of it like, oh, this is the Sunday. I suppose I was ignorant to that, so I think that's a really cool correlation you drew there, and it actually makes people who aren't aware be like, oh, okay. Hence my reaction just now. That's
Mm.
awesome. Thank you for the great details on that. Yeah, I think it's cool. I actually do wish maybe there is a version of that Christianity does, and I don't know how common that is in Judaism, but I kind of wish that was something that at least Christians partook into is like this, like, like have a dinner, like a weekly dinner with family, friends, or something. And maybe there is versions of Christianity that I'm just ignorant to that don't do that or do that. But I think that's a beautiful thing. Really, it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean, um, you know, we live in a very secular society,
mhm,
and this country was built on Judeo-Christian, mostly Christian values.
right.
So, given how secularized things have become, and Christianity is a very broad term, and of course, you know, that's what was spread when the empires were really colonizing nations. It's become, you know, it's different than Judaism
Mhm,
in that sense. We're much smaller,
you're right.
tight knit. We make up only 0.2% of the world's population.
Yes.
There's not a lot of us, and even in America, you're talking about maybe 1% of the American population being Jewish.
Right. And I mean, it is part of one of the three major Abrahamic religions. And when you think of that, oh, you think of Christianity, Islam with billions of followers, and then someone who's just not aware of the numbers, they think Judaism would follow suit with maybe like 500 million to a billion members, but there's only like what, like I think like there's like only 50 or 40 million members, or am I really off on that?
Less,
Really?
less, I believe. I'd have to look at the number, but I think it's closer to the tune of 20,
Wow.
20
And of course,
million.
like probably about half of that alone is in Israel, obviously. I'd assume so at least.
Most Jews in the world are actually in the U.S. Um, Israel, I'd say, is what, 1 to 2 million, I think.
Population
Um,
wise, maybe.
Population wise, I think it's 2 million. About, I think, at least half of it is Jewish, so at least 1 million Jews
Right.
in Israel.
Yeah.
Um,
People don't realize
but
how diverse Israel is. Like, Israel's a lot more than just Jewish people. It really is. I mean, you have
mhm,
swaths of different people in there. Obviously, you and I know that, but the average person would probably just think it's purely Jewish or Jewish
mhm,
individuals, which, yeah, of course, not even close to the truth. Um,
mhm.
well, anyways, on to our next question. Like, how important is your identity to you? Like, genuinely, is this an extremely important thing to you, maybe your family, or is it kind of something that is just a part of your life and not so severe to where it genuinely is such a big deal? I guess
Mhm.
in a simple phrase.
I would say that it is important to me. You know, it's what I grew up with. I still celebrate all the high holidays. I have, like I said, I have my Sabbath dinner every week, and even after, I stop having it with my father, I want to continue that tradition. You know, I'm very appreciative of the traditions that I've been brought up with. Um, the community and friends that I've had. Um, Here in Baltimore in the Jewish community. I think it's an integral part of who I am. Um, it plays a part, I think, in my ethics and how I operate, how not just personally but professionally as well.
Yeah, and I think that is a good way to end off and segue into what you just kind of said. And the next question would be: have you experienced, any discrimination or racism, being a Jewish man in America? Like, regardless of where you're from, Maryland, uh,
Mhm.
anywhere else in the country, Maryland, any other state, like, is there something, or have you frequently experienced discrimination, or has it only been very few times, or has it actually been never? Genuinely,
Mhm.
I'm very curious to hear this.
It's very sparse, especially when you growing up here. The Jewish community in Baltimore is one of the largest in the nation. So, I was consistently surrounded by Jews. So any times I faced discrimination or anti-Semitism, very infrequent, but it has happened. Um, Especially looking, I've experienced it more so actually in the online space.
Hmm.
Like it's very rampant, and especially in the wake of what happened in October 7th, 2023 in Israel, things have spiked dramatically.
Oh yeah.
I see it more and more. I mean, if you, the ADL quotes, over the years since that terrorist attack, anti-Semitic events have gone up more than 200% in the country. Even I have on like Instagram and some comments received like hateful anti-Semitic messages.
Really? Wow.
I've gotten personally messaged by somebody on Instagram before that was very anti-Semitic. Now, here in Baltimore alone, my grandfather's cemetery where he was buried was vandalized, and some
Oh my
gravestones were
God.
defaced or broken. Um,
That's
yeah.
yeah. You even our private conversations, like I don't think you've told me most of this, which is very unfortunate to hear. Like genuinely, like as friends, that is hard to hear, especially with what happened to the grave. That is heartbreaking. I can't imagine a family member's grave being vandalized. I mean, especially purposefully.
Well, thankfully, his grave wasn't vandalized. It was ones in the cemetery,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Thankfully, it wasn't because it's a very large cemetery where he was buried. But thankfully, his was safe.
So was this specifically Jewish individuals' graves who were harmed, or was it kind of like was it more indiscriminate?
Well, it's a Jewish. Only Jews are buried
Okay, okay,
in that
okay.
cemetery, so it was only Jewish graves.
That's very sad, genuinely. I mean, I can't imagine actually just destroying a grave, regardless of who it is. I mean, because it is a piece of the world, it's a piece of history, and it is a sacred piece, regardless of what you believe. And I don't know, it's so heartbreaking. I can't imagine destroying some family's gravestone of their beloved member. I mean, how bad does it have to get for someone to get to that point? Genuinely, how bad does it have to get to that point to where someone is actively harming gravestones, and then even just harming other people in general, verbally, physically, in a genuine sense, you know? And
Yeah, no, it's a terrible thing, and the I wouldn't want to get on a soapbox here, but it's my personal belief that this movement of anti-Zionism it's invariably linked to anti-Semitism. Like there's no getting away from it. It's people want there to not be a Jewish state anymore. Okay, where do they go? I don't know. Now,
right,
it's very messy. Anti-Semitism has been referred to as the oldest hate in the world. Um, and in the wake of things, we can see that it still exists.
absolutely. And unfortunately, it does seem like, as you stated earlier, it is growing. It really does seem that way. I mean, obviously, as a white, Christian man, I don't totally tend to experience similar things that you probably would, or other Jewish individuals. So I can't imagine. And with the contentions in the Middle East, and as you said, anti-Semitism on the rise, is it going to get worse from here, or is it going to slowly get better? Hopefully, I guess we'll have to wait and see. So that brings us to our next question. Um, so I'm trying to decide because I have a lot of good questions. Do you think America is a country where Jewish people, or specifically people like yourself, can thrive? Like, is this a country that you think anyone could thrive in, and as specifically, ethnic Jewish people, religious Jewish people, or both?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like as we said before, this country, the foundation was laid on Judeo-Christian values.
Hmm.
In the Constitution itself, it shows that every person has an inherent worth to them. Um, Now, I strongly believe that anyone can thrive. I mean, you look at the history of Jews in this country. Over 20% of Nobel Prizes across all categories have been won by Jews.
Hmm.
A
I did not know
lot,
that.
a lot were American Jews. The spirit of entrepreneurialism and innovation in America has allowed Jews to thrive. Because within Judaism, a big part of the philosophy is to learn and understand and really excel in your fields. Um, so I strongly believe that it is possible to thrive. America is a melting pot of diverse religions, cultures, ethnicities. Anyone can make it, regardless of who they are, let
Mhm.
alone someone who's Jewish.
Right. And yeah, it just goes back to, I guess, America's, you know, individualistic idealism, spanning from the Calvinist movement, which is actually, I did bring that up purposely because in my class we had a big quiz and assignments related to that, and it is plain to see how America's roots really have set up this country for multiple success stories in the millions. And while it does seem to be getting harder with the rampant explosion and just an inflation in the last couple of years, and the various contentions and housing prices becoming unattainable, it does seem to see, like in your case, that young people, because you're only 29, like you're still young, like people can still succeed on
My knees hurt.
a your knees may hurt, but you're still young. Like I'm young, you're young, and I hate it when people are like, "Oh, I'm old." It's like you're in their 20s. You're gonna be in your early 30s, barely. Like you're still young. I mean, half a couple hundred years ago, the top end of lifespan was probably what, in the 50s. That's when people usually passed away. Now it's getting upwards of 80s, 90s, even hundreds. So that sounds pretty young to me. But it shows that success stories are still there, and the American dream is still there in various aspects, um, regardless of who you may be, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, like my grandfather, my grandparents survived the Holocaust, and even after the Holocaust, he was able to come here and start a business and was very successful.
hmm,
So um, there is opportunity here. Anybody can really make it.
right?
You know? My my family's heritage is living proof of it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah, as you said, your grandparents came from the horrific reality of the Holocaust, but were able to achieve the American dream. Because becoming American isn't just being born, in America, as we know. You can travel here, become an immigrant of America, then a citizen. And I really think the conclusion of the Second World War really showed that, and how many, just how Europe was in shambles, and so many people of all various walks of life fled to the United States because it's the only country really that wasn't devastated and still had its industry intact, still had everything intact, and yeah, and took advantage of that reality and came back from quite literally the bottom and rose to what you would probably consider the top. So I think that's really beautiful, and it helps reaffirm in my personal belief that the American dream is still there. So next question: what is something about American culture that you are like, okay, I much prefer this over something that you probably are attuned to in your
Mm.
religious affiliation, your culture? Like, what is something you're like, okay, I love this part of my culture, but wow, America really does it better in this way.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, listen, I love the food that I have on the holidays. I love Jewish food, Jewish cuisine, but America is a mix of all sorts of cuisines, and
Yeah.
of course, I find things outside of Jewish cuisine that I like. So I don't know. That's a tough one. I personally just like living in a secular society, and
Really.
America's a secular society. The freedom that you have to be who you are and do what you want. Like, I wouldn't call myself the typical Jewish person per se. I grew up Orthodox. Um, I'm not as much Orthodox anymore. I'd
Mm,
say I'm more traditional in the sense that I keep the holidays. I go to synagogue sometimes on the high holidays. I still read from my siddur every now and then. You know, and hold these traditions. Um, so it's really allowed me to thrive in my own individual sense, and I think that's something great about America.
genuinely. Yeah. I mean, couldn't have said it better. Um, the next question is the complete inverse. Like, what is something about what you grew up with, what you experienced, that you are just like, okay, much better than what how America's equivalent is, or anything. Just complete opposite of what you just thought.
Um, I'd say probably education. You
Really?
know, one of the key tenets of Judaism, one of the key philosophies is to learn.
Hmm.
It's at the very foundation of Judaism. I mean, the Torah, the Talmud, the texts that we base our religion off of are constantly discussed. And it's sort of how you learn to logic, so to speak, and reason through things. And I think that's why you see a lot of Jewish success stories, like in that number I quoted you about the Nobel
Hmm.
Prize. The emphasis on learning and excelling in learning and education, I really value that philosophy, and it's ingrained in me as a Jew to have that. So I'd say that's probably one way, because I did have a public school upbringing, and
Hmm.
I did go to Hebrew school as well, and um, you know, compare and contrast, like the caliber that I saw in terms of student, and how effective the teaching was night and day.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, well said. That's definitely something I personally have a complaint about in America is our education system. I mean, we do have some very good colleges and universities. Many millions have traveled to our country for our universities, especially the prime Ivy League ones in the Northeast.
Mhm.
But our public education system isn't the greatest, I will admit. And that's something I completely agree with you on. Is America is lacking severely in that. I mean, Europe's public education systems for the grade levels is just much superior overall. Maybe even Canada's, for example. I'd have to look into Canada. I don't know a whole lot about their public education system, but it's something I wish the federal government and state governments would take much more seriously than they do. Because unfortunately, America is so centric on its own just existence. We don't totally look outwards into what's going on too often. I personally do. I mean, as you know, I love knowing about world events. You do too. So we both, I like to say, we both are very informed and educated on other parts of the world, but many Americans aren't, and it really does show. I mean, most Americans probably couldn't name or point to where Austria is on the map, or you know, I mean, even where the Israel Gaza conflict is occurring, people probably don't know where it is on the map. They can't point, and it is really interesting. So this goes on to our next, our last question. So our last question is it's long. It's the longest one, but it's a phenomenal question, in my opinion. Today exactly does mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the concentration camp. I mean, everyone, even the ones who barely know history, know of Auschwitz and its historical impact. I believe we are lucky to live in the United States and be free from religious persecution. I'm sure most would agree with that. Now, the final question to you specifically is what is one thing you think Jewish Americans can do to keep protecting their religious freedoms in America?
Well, you mentioned it's the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, so you know, teaching the story of what happened during the Holocaust is very important to make sure people don't forget, that they
Right.
know that you know there's evil in the world and things like this happen. In Jewish history, this isn't the only thing. There were
Mm.
inquisitions, forced conversions, massacres going back over 1,000 years. Um, Teaching, education, I think is important. And it's a special day to me because my grandmother she did survive Auschwitz. She was on one of the first transports to Auschwitz, and she survived. Yeah, education, I think, is definitely the right way. Um, no, and when anti-Semitism does arise, we need to face it. Anti-Semitism, or any hate, any persecution, you need to face it and decry it.
Right.
Because it's important that we don't let society devolve into hate or xenophobia, attacking people based on things like their religion or their culture or their race or anything. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so purely just education goes back to kind of what you said earlier in a previous question. Education, education. Like you think, your culture education is done better than the United States, and just educating people on the
Mhm.
horrific aspects of history. A lot of people don't care for history, which is very heartbreaking in my opinion. I History's always been my favorite topic outside of science and all that. Honestly, I would say to even overtake science.
Mhm.
And it's heartbreaking that it's just viewed as another boring class. And history is so impactful because the reality with history is it doesn't technically repeat, but it sure damn rhymes. It sure rhymes in various ways. I mean, people think genocide's kind of a thing in the past sometimes, but all you have to do is look around different parts of the world right now. We have what's going on in Burma with the military government that is technically committing a genocide against its people right now. Various racial and cleansing conflicts in Africa right now, I believe, with what's occurring in Sudan with between South Sudan and normal Sudan. I mean, it's still happening and it's still here. And
Yeah.
people think, oh, when they think of genocide, they tend to think of the Holocaust, and of course being the most prime example. But telling
Well,
people that it's still here and it still
yeah,
happens, and
the
you know,
the term genocide came from the Holocaust. They didn't know what to call it, and that's the term that it was created for the Holocaust.
I did not know
Now,
that.
yeah, that's how the word genocide came to be.
Do you know what genocide specifically means?
Yeah, genocide is the deliberate targeting of civilians of any race, culture, creed, whatever, any group of people, specifically targeting them to wipe them out, to eliminate them. Yeah.
And that's crazy that we didn't have a definition for a systemic killing previously to that.
Yeah.
I did not know that at all. I actually thought this has just been a normal term for a couple hundred years at least. So the fact it came from the Holocaust alone, it is.
That's how it was codified under the UN when the UN was established. That's that's how genocide came to be. It was codified into the laws of the UN.
Very, very immense to say the least. And yeah, it goes back to just, I mean, to end this interview, it goes back off to what you said: education, telling people about it, telling people
Mhm.
about the immensity of history, and especially the 20th century, where almost everything and anything happened. And just
Mhm.
because it's the modern era and we're past that, we're better now, it can always still happen. It is happening. Maybe not between, I guess, first world nations, depending on your point of view, but it can and could happen again. So yeah, I think I'll wrap up this interview with you here. I mean, a heavy, hard hitting question, but I think a question that really is needed to be said. So yeah, thanks, Max. Genuinely, I mean, I didn't think anyone better to interview than you. You know,
I appreciate it. Thanks for giving me a chance to talk about my culture, my upbringing, people's history.
mm-hmm.
Um, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Cool. Well, that marks the end of the interview. Thank you to any and all listeners.